The following podcast by Fusion Family Wealth, LLC, Fusion, is intended for general information purposes only. No portion of the podcast serves as the receipt of or as a substitute for personalized investment advice from Fusion or any other investment professional of your choosing. Please see additional important disclosure at the end of this podcast. A copy of Fusion's current written disclosure brochure discussing our advisory services and fees is available upon request or at www.fusionfamilywealth.com.
Welcome to the Crazy Wealthy Podcast with your host, Jonathan Blau. Whether you're just starting out or are an experienced investor, join Jonathan as he seeks to illuminate and demystify the complexities of making consistently rational financial decisions under conditions of uncertainty. He'll chat with professionals from the advice world, entrepreneurs, executives, and more to share fresh perspectives on making sound decisions that maximize your wealth. And now, here's your host.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Crazy Wealthy Podcast. I'm happy to have a good friend, founder of Liqui-Mark Pen Company. I shouldn't say founder, second or third generation. We'll get into that. But CEO of Liqui-Mark, certainly, and the man who makes it all happen and has continued the family legacy and expanded it successfully. So, Josh, welcome to the Crazy Wealthy Podcast. I'm appreciative of you joining us today.
Thanks, John. I'm excited to be here and all those good things that you've said.
Yeah,
That's so nice. That's great. I'm excited about this.
All right, good. That means that you don't have much going on in life, but that's
nothing. You know what?
You're
I love.
excited to be
I
with
gotta
me.
tell you something. I love when things are on my calendar like this. This is like,
Like,
this is
no pressure.
There's
No pressure.
yeah. I guess so.
So I wanted to talk about a few things. I want to talk a little bit about to begin the origins of the business and the story about your grandfather. I guess on your mother's side, right?
Yeah.
Being the originator of the family's introduction to the pen business, and then how it evolved from that to your dad creating a company and you guys getting involved, and then the information about which member of the family has been in the pen business the longest, so that won't be what people expect.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a pretty wild story. It's a great entrepreneurial story. I'm proud of. Always have been. When my grandfather was in the pen business, I mean, his whole career from the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, and when my parents got married in 1972, my grandfather, my mom's dad, said to my father, "Come, I want you to come work for me. Come on, Stu, come work for me. You can be a salesman. I'm going to teach you about the pen business." So he did, and he was doing something totally different. He was in sales and he was doing that for a couple of years, and about 2 years in, someone approached my grandfather to buy his business, and he was I would say my grandfather at the time was probably about 56 years old. He saw dollar signs and sold his business, sold his house on Long Island, and moved to Florida. And my father continued to work there, and he was on a sales call and selling up in the upper Midwest, selling what we know as Kmart back then. And he went to go on a sales call, and my father was 24 at the time, and the buyer was probably more than twice his age, and said to him, "Stu, I like you, but I don't like the company that bought your company, the company you work for. So I want you to go start a company." And my father looked at me and says, "What do you want me to do?" He said, and he was selling
I
pens.
think at that point your father saw the writing was on the wall.
Yeah, he said, yeah, for sure. And he was selling pens and coloring, all school supplies, right? Writing instruments. And he says, how am I going to do that? I just got married 2 years ago. I have my son's, not even a year old. This was my brother at the time. I have an older brother, Craig, and he says, if I'm lucky, when I get home, my wife didn't spend all the money for me to pay the rent. And he said, "Listen, I'm putting you into business. I'm going to give you an order for 1 million packs of coloring markers, and we're going to private label them with our own brand, and we're going to do it for back to school, and go figure it out. I'm putting you into business." So he left the meeting and went to the airport and called my grandfather down in Florida on a payphone collect, because it was, the 70s.
Some of
And
our listeners, if they're
don't
younger,
even
they
know
won't
what that
even know what
is,
any of
right?
that means, right? Yeah.
You called collect. So you picked up the phone, you dialed the operator, you said, I want to make a collect call. And then they had to accept the charges on their bill to whoever answered the phone.
Well,
For
by the
those
way,
who,
just a funny story. When we used to do that with my grandparents in Florida, we made a collect call to them, not from a payphone, but from our house, because my mom was frugal. So she'd call, they would reject the call. That would be the signal. And then they'd call us so that the bill was on them. So
can you imagine? So my father called my grandfather collect and said, I got this situation. My grandfather said, okay, you know what? I'm getting on a plane and I'm going to come back to New York, and then we're going to get on a plane and we're going to go to Italy. And and that's what they did. And they went, and he said, I'm going to lend you the money. I'm going to lend you some of the money. And he lent them, money to help procure the order, and back then there was no infrastructure in Asia and China to buy these products from. And Italy was a big, Torino, Italy was a capital of the world for, molds that were used for pens and markers and even cosmetics, right? Similar sizes. And they went to Italy, and they met with the factory, and they produced the product there, and that's how Liqui-Mark got started. And they imported it from Italy, the product, and then within the next 2 years, and my father, he needed to legitimize himself. He rented a desk in my great uncle's car rental company's office in Hicksville on Old Country Road. And and then a couple of years later, the business continued, and he didn't want to import anymore. And he built molds and bought machines and opened up a factory in Brooklyn, in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And that's how
well,
the business
clearly,
got
this person
started.
who convinced your dad to leave that company saw something in him that
He did. You
that
know
was
what?
real.
He did. And then that's how the manufacturing started, and within a couple of years, and we to this day we still have many of the original machines that are running. Our company's now in Long Island. We're in Hop Hog, and in this facility, we're making ink, we injection mold plastic parts, we assemble, print, package, and ship, and we sell major retailers. We sell school and office products distributors to sell to the school and office products world. And then we have promotional products division that we started about 25 years ago when I
And
first jumped
is
in.
everything done in the U.S.?
Not everything, but I would say about half our product line is made here in the U.S. And
Okay,
then,
cool.
we have molds that we've built over the years as we evolve the product line that we have overseas, whether it's in China. Most of it is in China. We do business, we bring product from all over the world, and um, to complement our product line on all divisions of the company. And but we still make product here, and just a couple of years ago, when my father bought machines, he used to fix the machines himself, and he had to hire a mechanic. And that gentleman worked here for 47 years, and he just retired a couple of years ago. And
That's great. Well, that says a
it's a
lot
pretty
about you
wild
guys.
story. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a pretty
So
great
tell
story.
me a little bit about the company in terms of the number of clients that you serve. There's not a small business that like a stationery store.
No, and
It's
we're a manufacturing company, so we
yeah.
manufacture the finished product. I should probably have product here, but like for example, here I'll grab something to show you. So you know, this is what we make. We make coloring markers. Washable coloring
Yeah,
markers for kids. Okay,
yeah,
and we
those are
sell under
great.
our brand, and we sell under the private brand of major retailers. So sometimes you can walk into a CVS or a Walmart, and you'll see our brand, or you'll see their brand, the store brand, right?
But it looks like
And
your product.
it looks like our product that's made here or made
Yep.
within one of our products that we make, one of our molds that we make overseas, depending on the item. So on the retail side, we sell major retailers. And so there's several dozen of those to customers to sell. You ask about the quantity of customers. On the promotional product side, there are thousands and thousands of customers to sell. So we sell through a network of distributors. We would work through a marketing and advertising firm, as our distributor, who would then sell you directly, and you would go to them and come say, here, I want to use, our Fusion logo, and we want to have it on hats and shirts and pens and frisbees and drinkware, and they would help you with the creative and the artwork and procure it from all the manufacturing suppliers like us, and we would drop ship to you. So that's that business. It's a great business. And then there's the
And
school side. The school side is we don't sell school districts directly either. we work through a network of distributors that they're all, a lot of them are government contracts, things like that.
Well, one of the things that I've, I met you through your friendship initially with Amy, my
Yeah.
wife, and she always told me I'd like you, and I do like you. As I got to know you, the more I get to know you, the more I like you. One of the things I always liked is you're in a successful business that's really, I guess, third generation. What I've seen in my business over the years, dealing with people and their wealth that they've created either in business or as executives or inheritance, how to handle their emotions generally and deal with the wealth in a way that's different than the way it was built, right? So to build wealth in a business, you often need to be willing to, and sometimes forced to, take big outsized risks, and you want things to happen quickly, and you want to be in control of something. If you have a division that's not doing well, sometimes entrepreneurs want to spin that division off and put more resources into a division that's doing better. And we feel we need to control all these things. And when you're investing, after you build the wealth, the skills that you had as an entrepreneur, you actually need to unlearn, because instead of being wanting to get things done quickly and be in control and take outsized risks, you need to do things slowly and be very patient and not take very many risks at all and let compounding happen. And what
Yeah.
I found is a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've been guilty of this, is we assume that our skills not only need to be different when we invest, but that the skills that we have acquired our success through entrepreneurship with are transferable and can lead to success in investing. And in
Sure.
fact, what happens is it's the opposite. We get overconfident and we tend to make missteps. So along those lines, do you feel like you've seen in business any decisions that you've had to make where you've seen emotions creep in? Maybe the
Oh,
timing of the decisions or something like that, where emotion crept in, and if you look back and say, well, I can think of those things, and maybe what would you have done differently
yeah, definitely.
to
I
slow
mean,
it down, right? To
yeah,
slow down the
I mean,
decision process.
I think that, one thing I think I learned from my father, like, just his whole, even just how the onset of how he started the business was, he was never afraid to take a risk. It's like he rolled the dice. He took a chance on himself, and then I think he proved right away that taking that chance was, well worth it. When we, and I'm not ashamed to say, when we were in Brooklyn for a very long time. And then, the company moved to Long Island, not in the building we're in now. We were in Westbury for 11 years, and we had to move. We rented a building. We had a great deal on a building from somebody my father knew. And we were outgrowing the space, and he wanted his building back. So my father wanted he wanted to buy a building. It was a good investment. Real estate's a great investment, right? But it was a big risk. It was a big number. We bought a 30,000 square foot building in the Hop Pug Industrial Park. And I kid you not, I remember, though more than 5 minutes after closing on the building, we lost our biggest account, our biggest customer. And it was a detrimental time for our business because, we had it was we had a tremendous amount of expenses in the move, infrastructure moving is a tremendous cost. And now we had, this higher operating cost of, of paying a mortgage off for a piece of real estate. We had to
And
still
less
operate the business.
revenue available to
And
pay it
now
off.
less revenue. So yes, but do I think that I look back on it and I remember, I was the earlier stages of my career, like can't be good, and I was still learning and I wanted to learn. And my father said, he used to tell me, like, don't worry, we're going to figure it out. It's going to be fine. We'll be fine. We'll figure it
Well,
out.
that's
And
great.
yeah,
So
it was
you had a
but
calming attitude.
yeah, totally.
Is
And
that the crisis when we talked recently that you said about 20 years ago
yeah,
you had a crisis? That was
yeah.
it.
And then,
Okay.
really the truth is, like, at some point, like, my father and his business partner, I mean, they were putting personal money back into the business, and it was, scary, but they had a lot of faith. They were never scared to. They always had confidence in themselves. And my father, and I was watching it and I was, this is crazy, and I look back on that and I see that he had faith and, like, not to take those risks and roll the dice, right? Because he had confidence in himself that he'll correct it. And he did. We all did. We all
Let me
worked
ask you a
at it.
question. As an investor, if you remember, Because I know you
Yep.
lost your dad, what, about 5 or 6 years ago?
Seven and a half
7 years
years
ago?
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know how close you guys were. You're a close family in general. And do you, as an investor, right, with his wealth, do you feel that he had the same confidence, right? So in other words, if he invested in the capital markets, did he have the same confidence when the markets were going through challenges, whether it's because of he wasn't around, but the pandemic or things like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or did he feel like because he wasn't in control, I wish I didn't have much outside of my business?
You know what? Yeah, I think he was, if I look back on, I gotta, think about it, how he,
Yeah,
took
it's tough because he's
chances
not
on those things.
around.
Yeah, like, he did. He took the risk. He was willing to, he always was willing to roll the dice. He did. He always was willing to roll the dice. He took to take the chance,
So he
So I
was a good
think
investor too. He wasn't
he
like
was, he
he,
was, he
yeah,
was. Yeah, I
okay.
think he was, but he was also conservative. He took sometimes he took a conservative approach, I think, in investing. And I think that he learned that, diversification was good. I think that, as time went on, making that real estate investment, I mean, it was a big number, bigger, much more of a risk to take on, buying a piece of commercial real estate, had never done that
No
previously.
experience with it, right?
No experience, but just knew that in the long term of it had, if you make it right, if we, okay, in his eyes was, look, hopefully this will be a good investment for my retirement someday. We'll pay off the building, and it'll be a stream of income for me to live on. That was
Yep.
really how we thought. And
No,
and
it's interesting because what you said about dad being conservative with his investments. So I see that with a lot of entrepreneurs, even executives when they retire, because executives are similar to entrepreneurs in one sense. They feel like they're in control.
yep,
And so now when they're investing after they retire or they sell a business, they're not in control. And we say being more conservative, usually people mean they're going to buy more of things like bonds, right? Things that don't fluctuate. And that gets to the heart of entrepreneurs versus investors, where for investors, the biggest threat to our money is inflation, not volatility. The
hmm
industry thinks it's volatility. And when we're in business, volatility hurts, right? If the tariffs are,
sure,
I don't know if you guys got
yeah, of
impacted by the tariffs,
course,
right?
yeah,
But you
very
can't
much so.
control that. So, right, it hurts.
Oh, it
And
hurt big.
so
It hurt everybody big time.
right, hurt everybody. So, and you try to do something about it, and there are limitations. But in investing, what we try to do is you try to preempt the volatility by going into bonds to control or mute volatility. And what happens is bonds actually are the carrier of what I call the disease of money, which is inflation. So they freeze our money. If I buy a 10-year bond at 8% a year, in 10 years, I need 12% a year to buy what 8%. I don't have that. And my $1 million that I put in the bond is still $1 million in 10 years. And I
Yep.
need a million four. So it's most people need to be reframing when they retire or when they're investing, how they think about risk. Risk is the erosion of the permanent value of my money to inflation, not the temporary fluctuation in the number of my dollars. So it's just interesting to hear that you said that he was conservative, because that's in line with what I see, because they don't control that in their mind as much, right? They're relying on an intangible, so they tend to make a decision that's actually going against what their long-term goal is, which is to protect their purchasing power. They don't understand it. By the way, how do you think about those things?
I mean, I think that in a very similar way, because that's how that's who I learned from, and I look at it, and I've
Yeah.
learned, even in business decisions that I've made, in the last several years, that I've taken those risks. I'm willing to take those risks. I'm willing to throw, money at a new product and product development, or a marketing campaign, or an investment in a customer. So a lot of our customers require us to make certain investments in their own marketing. If it's kind of, you have to kind of buy into the customer, right?
Yeah, they
And
want to
I
show
look,
you have skin in the game. You have
yeah,
skin
they
in the
want,
game,
exactly.
right?
That's a
Yeah.
better, yeah, but great way to say it. They want
Mhm.
to see that you have skin in the game, and and there are times I say no, and I'll say that this, I don't feel, my gut instinct is this isn't going to work. If I'm questionable on it, sometimes I think a little differently. Where I'll say, what's the worst that can happen? We made a little bit of an investment in trying something. If we have to prove to ourselves if it's going to work or not. If it doesn't work, then we go back to what we were doing previously. But
Yeah.
sometimes I've learned that you take those risks. It's the same thing like you mentioned about the tariff situation. I mean, it was a detrimental time for a lot of businesses, right? And I would tell you this past May was probably one of the more stressful for me, managing that aspect than when I had to, when the COVID situation started and we had to close our company for 6 weeks. That was stressful.
Right.
If we're not shipping product, we're not generating any revenue. And how are you paying your
And your
employees?
costs aren't going away.
The costs don't go away, right? So,
Right.
Navigating these things and taking certain risks and making certain decisions, I think that, I've had a similar approach where, I make I think I've always made a pretty calculated, everything in life is a calculated risk, right? So,
Yep.
I think I've made a pretty calculated risk. I can't say I know that I'm always going to be right or if I feel like I'm going to be wrong, but you
No.
have to take those
By the way,
chances.
what I call what you just said, when I try to have a new potential investor, is we talk about decision making in a way that compounds rationality. What I mean by that is we can't control the outcomes. We can only control the inputs.
Yeah.
As Rich said, you're taking a calculated risk. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, for example, I had a client last year who sold a business for a lot of money, and they were ready to start their plan that we devised for them. But they said, should we be investing the equity money like all at once, or should we put it in over a number of quarters or a number of? So I said, look, there's two answers to that. The answer is, if you're appealing to your emotional wants, you don't do it at once. But if you're appealing to your financial needs and that's the needs of your family financially, you do it at once. And so what I explained is there's over 1,100 12-month periods going back to 1926. So January 26 to December, February 26 to January 27, and so forth. Over 1,100 to call rolling 12-month as opposed to annual periods. And so 75% of those or so are positive. So I said to them, by you holding back any money, you got a 3-to-1 odds bet against you being right over the next year, and over 3 years it's like 85%, right? So the point is, 25% of the time when you do that, when you invest your money, by nightfall of the day you have it, you'll be wrong. But 75% you'll be right. So compound rationality. The rational thing to do is invest it by nightfall of the day you have it, and always behave that way. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing you're saying, right? Take a rational approach to an opportunity or a problem, and always do that. And sometimes the outcome isn't going to reflect what you hope for. It's the way it works.
You're right. You're right. So I think I've, I guess the easy answer to your question is yes. I've followed the same approaches. I've learned to take those risks and make those investments, and in the business and in people and in and take those chances, because if you don't take the chance, you don't know what the result is going to be. And I would say more times than not, the results are positive. The results are good.
Right, that's it. You're compounding rationality. You're taking a
Yeah.
rational approach. You're not abstaining from making decisions. You're making what you feel are rational decisions, and knowing sometimes, even though they're rational, they might not work, and then you learn from it.
And you
right?
learn from it. And you can't only beat yourself
That's
up
it.
so much, right?
Yeah, well, it's what it was Wayne Gretzky said. You miss all the shots
Yeah.
that you never take, right?
Exactly.
So,
It's
100% of
true.
them.
It's true, and we work in an environment, we sell retail on a big side of our business, and retail's brutal. I mean, it's not just, I have friends that sell retail, and I'm sure you have a lot of, your network and people that have, or somehow, some way is connected to the retail world in some
Of
to
course.
some capacity.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. I have a friend who's, manufactures a totally different product line than me in the apparel world. And it's just brutal, more now than ever before. And it's interesting. But, the thing that I can say is I've never been afraid to just, open up my mouth and reach out to, a buyer and have a discussion. And even if it's something, you get rejected. And those are calculated risks too. At one point, there's a lot, I know you talk a lot about your background in psychology. We've talked about this, right? And there's a lot of psychology in sales. There's,
Of course.
I might say something that's going to piss them off, or, I may say something that's going to, make them more interested, So those are risks too.
And sometimes you don't know, right?
Most of the time you don't know.
Right.
Most
You
of the
don't
time
know,
you don't know.
if what you're saying is going to trigger one thing or the other. So Josh, as your business risk appetite reflects Dad's, does your investment approach, where you're saying being more conservative, does that also reflect Dad's?
I would
Like,
say,
do you find that that's the same thing?
yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think that I've learned to diversify myself too, and take some risks. I recently bought another home, as you know. And I'm your
Yeah, no, I
neighbor
know
out
that.
east, and
Congratulations.
and
Yeah.
that was, a big risk for me. That was it was a risk, and it was also there's a reward behind it. And I took myself. I have a family friend who once told me, you got to put yourself out of your comfort zone once in a while. And he did a similar thing a long time ago and took the risk, and it paid off and made it, it changed your life, so that's why I did it. And that put me a little out of my comfort zone, still does, when I'm
Of
getting,
course. Look, but
when,
that's always the case. It's also change, right? Whenever
but
we have a big change like
yeah,
that,
but
it
I
makes
feel
us
like that was
uncomfortable.
also a good way to, you ask about, like, from an investment standpoint, it's also an investment,
Yep.
it's definitely an investment. And I think that was one of the biggest changes I've done in my approach to investing. And that would say that maybe that's considered conservative, or maybe that's totally the
No, well, that's
opposite.
also an investment in quality of life, right? Like
Yeah.
the homes we buy, like our house in Montauk, it
Yep.
could be an investment, but every year I'm putting money into taxes and
Sure.
upkeep,
Then you
and
get
and
then you get all your electric bills come at once for all these different
right, you know what I mean? So it's not the same
that's
as
when my
investing in
reminder
real
is when,
investments,
yeah,
but it's an investment certainly in the quality of life. So
for
Josh,
sure.
one of the things that you talked about is your grandfather, your father, and you and your brother
Yep.
are the active, historically and presently the active participants in this business.
Yep.
And there's one member of the family, your mom, who was never active in the business,
Yeah,
but yet you tell me that she's the one that has the most experience of
for
all of
sure.
them in the pen
Yeah.
business.
She's been in that, it's funny because a couple months ago, I don't use LinkedIn as probably as much as I should. And we were talking about using LinkedIn and engaging. And one of the challenges we have on, I was explaining one of the challenges I have on the retail side. We're with major retailers, whether it's Walmart or Target, you're connected to all these people, but you can't get their attention, to establish a rapport like we used to. And somebody had told me, sometimes it's good to use LinkedIn to post something maybe a little bit more personal, which I would never, never really post much too personal to begin with. I think in social media, but that's just by choice. And in LinkedIn, everybody looks at it as more of a business networking. So one day I was drinking my coffee on a Sunday morning, and I was thinking about that conversation I had a couple days before, and how to use LinkedIn differently. And it dawned on me. I said, I had taken this screenshot of my mother. My mother will FaceTime me, at least 10 times a day. There's no exaggeration to that either. And I'm good with it. I actually I love it. And I had taken a screenshot of us on the phone, and I posted that picture because it all kind of hit. And I said, my mother's been in the pen business longer than all of us, her whole life, since the day she was born. She was born, my grandfather was in the pen business. He wasn't in the business for so long. My mother's going to be 75 in June. 75 years she's in the pen business,
See that?
and she and I could tell you she knows all about the business. We still we discuss it, we talk about it, but she lived it, from even working trade shows, and hearing who the people are, taking, she would go with my dad and take clients out. My clients, who became my friends, they know my mom, they've met my mom, and have built a relationship with her. And the truth is she's been in the business longer than all of us. And she's lived it. She's lived the constant discussion of business at every dinner table, every holiday meal, on a Saturday afternoon at my on the soccer field of my niece or nephew's soccer game or baseball game, whatever it may be. Somehow something's coming up, Dad, I got an email from this customer, whatever. And you're just sitting there, it's constant discussion. So she's been in it for longer than everybody.
And
And
Josh, you're in the business still with your brother.
yep.
What family businesses? I have a couple of clients who run family businesses, and they all come with a balancing act that's needed, right? So how do you and your brother manage the business together? What are the biggest challenges, the biggest rewards of working with family that you've found in your experience?
To me, it's like the greatest feeling to know that I can work with my family I have. I mean, I certainly, miss my dad, and, that was always like an incredible thing to work with him and learn from him, and teaching both my brother and I. to continue on and, work with my brother. It's one of the most rewarding things that can happen, and you see, the people that work with us, who've been working with us for a long time, who've become, we're all part of our family, and we're all working for the same cause to, listen, at the end of the day, we all need to earn a living, right? And you're trying to make people's lives better. And I watched my dad give people opportunities, we still to this day have some incredible people that work here that, came to the front door of the building to come in and on an interview to prove themselves, and we're working here for 27, 35, 40 years. And it's mind-blowing to me. I think it's important that you find the balance of, of responsibility, and what areas each person focuses on, but collaborate and coordinate together to make decisions. Sometimes, sometimes I think it's good when one person's the glass is half full and one's the half empty approach, because the optimist doesn't always look at all the risks, or doesn't consider
one
all
of
the
the
risks.
things along those lines, what we call that in behavior, is confirmation bias, right? So the optimist in business is only doing a Google search for articles that confirm their bias as to what they should be doing. They never look at they never search with terms for the half-empty scenario. So they're only fueling the fire to be more and more.
They're supporting them. They're supporting their own choice and decision.
Right. They're confirming their biases, right? Instead
Yeah.
of challenging them and saying, "Hey, is there something I'm missing here?"
Sure.
And so when I say that for the audience, so when you find yourself without someone in a business situation or any other situation in life that can counter your optimism, if you're overly optimistic, called optimism bias, then you want to make sure that you check confirmation bias activities, that when you're doing searches and you want to challenge your thoughts and then come up with a decision. It slows you down and reduces overconfidence a little bit. One of the things I always admired about you, Josh, is you're in my business. I've come across a lot of families where they're either in business or they're inheriting money, and I always refer to as the generation, the younger generation.
Yep.
They were born on third, but they think they hit a triple.
Yeah.
Right? And they act like that. You never acted like that.
No.
You seem to have very good values. And so what led to that? What is it that shaped your value system? I know you mentioned, mom had a stroke at one point and dad,
Yep.
and that helped, but curious to hear that, because you really, to me, it's remarkable. You're so humble and so caring, and I know you're genuine, because I know how close you are with your mom, that you do welcome 10 or more, probably more than 10 FaceTime today.
Of course.
But talk about what shaped your value system that way.
And I appreciate you saying all those nice things.
True.
Thank you. I watched, I did it. I was 2 years old when my mom had a paralyzing stroke. And my father was, he was within the first 5 years of, establishing his business, and I watched him firsthand, take care of, my mom, who was paralyzed, and had to go through a tremendous amount of therapy and physical therapy, speech therapy, to overcome and live a normal life, all while running two businesses, because at one point my father, we have a business partner, and they merged their companies together, and he was running two businesses, traveling the world, schlepping back and forth every day from from Westbury to Brooklyn, and he still came home to coach, two little leagues of two kids who were 5 years apart. And my father used to tell me, he's like, what a pain in the ass it is to coach a 12-year-old and then coach 7-year-olds. It's two different worlds.
Right.
And I was like, that's your biggest complaint today?
No,
But I watched, I watched him do all that, and and he worked hard until he worked hard, and even when he pushed himself to work and always worked hard, and even my father, we financially, it took a long time for him to feel financially comfortable and sound, even after when he did, and then had to take all these risks, and we had some financial struggles in our business. He was always, modesty is a good policy, right? And I watched him work hard, and I watched him get his hands dirty, and and he never, it didn't matter who was, he respected people. And my father, even last week, I was at a trade show on Sunday. I went to the toy fair and I ran into a manufacturer from Italy who knew my dad, and like, it humbles me. And that they talk about him in the way they do. People knew him all over the world, and it makes me feel, I'm proud of that. And he worked hard, and
Yep.
people ask, what do you do for a living? I work. I work. That's what I
Right.
do. And that's,
But what's nice is you took all those great qualities and
yeah,
really
and we do, and we're very involved. We're, I too, similar to what you said, I've seen similar scenarios of people and, family or generational businesses, and they kind of ride the coattails of it. And if that's their thing, good for them, right?
No, but you know what I
y-
see in you is you're a happy person. You're happy. You spend time with your mom. You like cooking. You do all the things you like. You like
got to
your
find a balance
exercise
in life,
routines.
right? Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
but you're happy
yeah.
because of your attitude. In other words, one of the things about happiness and money is it's true what they say. Money. If money is what's motivating people, and they're constantly living in a world of comparison instead of a world of what's good for them. So they're looking to what I call their external benchmarks to show the world I have this, as opposed to the internal benchmark. I'm doing this because it's important to me. You're living life to the internal benchmarks, and because of that, those people are generally much happier. Whereas when you're living to the external benchmarks, there's always going to be someone with more and bigger and better, and so
Yep.
you're never happy. You're always chasing the next dopamine rush. I want to buy the bigger car, the new car, the bigger house, the new house, and so that to me is one of the reasons. Just knowing what I know about money and psychology is why you're a well-grounded and happy person who also can be running a successful business side by side. Those two things usually don't go together, or often don't go together. So I want to finish up with a couple of questions. One of the things
Sure.
I've learned sitting with entrepreneurs over time is that once they win the game, whatever that means to them, right? Business is good. They've achieved a lot of what they're going to achieve or what they wanted to achieve. The real challenge tends to become not overplaying it. And does that resonate at all with your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, I just the other day had to introduce myself to a new buyer, and I had to explain who our company is and what we do, and I was saying, I manufacture coloring markers for kids, but we're not Crayola, I'm not Crayola, and I don't want to be. I don't need to be.
Right,
You know,
right.
is that similar to what you just said?
Right. Yeah.
You know, if we can, in my approach, in leading this business and running this business over several years since my father passed away, and I learning from him is to, if everyone can make an honest living and live a good life, and we can have a great employees, encourage them for growth, and do a good job and be profitable, then we did a good job. That's it. I don't need to be greedy. I don't need to be. Would it be nice to have our business to be 10 times the size of what it is? I suppose it would be, but it comes with 10 times as many problems too.
Right.
So
And you have
I
to
think
hire
you have
10
to
times
find,
as many
and
people
yeah,
and
and
deal with
that's
all of that stuff.
that's not
Right.
an easy. That's probably one of the hardest things you can
Yeah.
do in running any business. You know that, right? Is
Yeah.
people,
No,
right? So I would say
absolutely.
I would say that it's finding the right balance of how to keep a healthy business.
One of the things I always try to teach people, a lesson I learned, is no matter how much money someone has or what size business someone has that's multiple times the size of my business and what I do or your business and what you do, you have to, as the smaller business owner or the less wealthy person, have to always recognize that you need to always be able to have something that bigger business and wealthier person can never have. And that's enough. Because once you don't have enough, you keep moving the goalposts and problems start to happen. And so that's what you kind of just said. You have enough. I have enough. I'm not looking to be Goldman Sachs. I have a great business. I love my clients. We do something special for them relative to the big firms, and I don't want to be a big firm. Of course, it'd be nice to have a big firm, like you said, but that's not. But the stuff that comes with that,
I think it's good
maybe
to find
losing
that
some.
level balance, just a balance of where
Right.
you can feel good, everybody's happy, everybody's making a good living, and you can cruise along. I mean, I know that may sound like a very basic approach, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay
Basic
with it.
works. You don't want to lose. Getting to that bigness, I find often means losing your authenticity, your integrity to some degree. and some of your principles and values that we talked about. So
For sure.
there's nothing big enough that's worth trading those things off. So the last question I have for you is if you were advising someone who's building something meaningfully, a business now, and is now thinking of how not to undo it emotionally or behaviorally, what might you tell them to watch out for?
I would say, you do have to take the emotion out. It's hard to remove emotion, right?
Very hard.
At one point I felt maybe too emotionally connected to this business, right? And and I've learned to take some of the emotion out of it. And I think that, emotion should play a role in every decision you make, but it shouldn't overpower your decision. You have to. We're all human. We're going to have emotions about everything we do, we see, we hear, we think about, we react to, right? And if you're talking about somebody who's in a family business, a generational family business, I think that can be harder. That's definitely harder to take emotion out of it, because there's a longevity of investment in that, and family investment in
You
that.
feel like you're going to let down the predecessors on top of everything else. Right?
And I think I had a good, and my father did, at one point, before he passed away, he had some issues, but it wasn't expected. But, he did say to me, he says, I want you guys to do whatever you want to do with this business, and never feel like it's something you have to do forever. It's whatever you decide to do with it. At some point, if you ever wanted to sell it, if you ever wanted to merge, if you ever wanted to keep doing it, you'll never let me down. And I want you to, some people need to hear that, and that gave me a lot of confidence to know that whatever I wouldn't feel, I wouldn't feel guilty that if I were to ever make those choices one day. And I think that was important. I think that in a generational business and a succession plan, it's good. The leader should say that to the next phase of who's taking it on, because
that's a great message to leave to the audience. 100%.
Yeah, because you don't want to leave too much emotion in it. So
yeah,
until then, till then, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Keep doing it. You're doing it well. By the way,
Thank you.
I'll leave off with one thought for those listening. So what I found is the hardest part of wealth is not in the building of it, right? Taking the risk, doing all the things we all do as entrepreneurs. But it's unlearning the behaviors that helped us to build the wealth through the business and then become better investors, because the behaviors we need for that are oftentimes not just different, but the opposite. So that's the last thought I want to leave the audience with. And I thank you so much
Thank you, John.
for
This was
joining,
great.
Josh.
Thank you for all the nice things you said about me. And it was really, really sweet. And I enjoyed doing this with you. I always enjoy listening to your podcast. It's great. And I can't wait to hear what Amy has to say about it all.
Yeah, she'll be in the closing act. You know that.
I know.
Thanks so much, Josh.
All right,
and
John.
I look forward to seeing you when you're coming down to Florida.
Yeah, all right. You got it. I'll let you know.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Crazy Wealthy Podcast. You can get all of our podcasts on your traditional podcast venues, as well as on the crazywealthypodcast.com site and fusionfamilywealth.com. Stay tuned to hear Amy's call-in for the recap of today's episode.
Hi, honey.
Hi, hon. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just getting ready to go out on a Friday Eve.
Me too.
Coincidentally. So I heard you had a conversation with my best buddy, Josh, today.
I did. Josh Goodelman. What a nice guy.
He is the nicest guy, but funnily enough.
I say second nicest, but that's just my
Right.
bias.
Well, that's true. That's true. But he is the nicest guy, but we met having a fight with each other, fighting over a spin bike, because he said he had one spot. I said I had that spot. And turns out, of course, I was right. But it turned into a beautiful friendship of many, many years. So how was that conversation today?
It was great. He followed the conversation I had with Samantha Bird, whose grandmother founded Lady Bird Cosmetics. It's basically a manufacturer of makeup, and they sell it to different people who want a private label. And that's Josh is basically in the same business. So his mother's father started in the pen business, and then when Josh's father was 24,
and got married, his father-in-law said, "Why don't you come work for me and be a salesman?" And so that's how it started. It's really Josh is the third generation, just like Samantha Bird is the third generation of her. And it's a manufacturing business. They manufacture markers, erasable markers and things like that.
So what are the similarities you saw between the two conversations?
Well, the two things I saw is the amount of love and respect that Samantha has for her grandmother, who's no longer around, is the same that Josh has for his father, who's no longer around. And they weren't motivated by money. They were motivated by seeing great people that they revered laying out a foundation, and they wanted to continue it. They were proud to be able to continue it. So that's what they were chasing. They were chasing carrying the legacy forward. And they're both just such good people who are giving and just see the good in everything. And I saw that as a similarity between them.
Well, I personally see that in Josh all the time, because I don't recall many conversations where his father's name doesn't come up or his mother's name. And we know he's a phenomenal son. But he has so much respect for his father. How does that, in your business, when people have so much respect for their elders and they make money decisions, how does that affect how the younger generation makes money decisions?
What do you mean? How did the way the father made money decisions?
How does that affect how Josh
makes it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, in Josh's case, because he really respected and admired his father's demeanor and success and everything. Josh, I think, like you said, his father was a risk taker, rolled the dice. Josh, I think, has the same attitude. So I see that it was like nurture over nature, right? He just followed what his father did. The interesting thing is his father started the business because when his grandfather had the pen business, I think a couple of years after Josh's father started working for him as a salesman, he got an offer to sell the business, and Josh said he saw dollar signs. And then Josh's father was like the salesperson. He was selling to, I think, a Kmart. And the person who was the buyer, they said, "I like you. I just don't like the company you guys sold to. So I'm going to give you money, and I want to help you start your own business."
Wow.
And that's how Josh's father started his own business.
Wow, that's crazy. But going back to something that you do, for example, if Josh's father, and we're just using Josh as an example, if Josh's father held certain stocks, do most people who revere their parents continue to hold those same stocks?
Well, there's a lot of behavioral aspects to it. So there's something called the endowment bias. So we value something that we own, like our house. If we were putting our house up for sale and our broker told us your comparable houses are selling in your neighborhood for $1.2 million, then what we would do is we would say, if it's selling for $1.2 million, the comparables, I'm going to ask $1.2 million to $1.4 million.
Right.
Because I own the house. But if you were bidding on the same house, you would bid $1 million. So you value the same thing more if you own it than if you had the opportunity to gain it. And so when someone, if Josh inherited stock from his father, because of the endowment bias, even if it should be sold to diversify, he might not sell it because he might not go out and say, "Oh, if I had $1 million, I'd buy this stock. But if my dad left me $1 million worth of it, I'm going to keep it." You see what I'm saying? So it's the same that. And the other thing is regret aversion. So if you sell the kind of things that your dad owned, right, instead of keeping them, and then the outcome isn't as good as the outcome your dad had by holding those things, you're going to regret that. And long-term regret never goes away. So to avoid regret, I'm just going to keep the same types of investments my dad had because that's what always worked.
But that's not always the best thing to do. We know that.
No, normally not. That's an emotionally driven decision that's not rational. And it's actually a bad thing to do. But that's what we do as human beings.
So how, as an advisor, how do you overcome something like that?
Well, you have to, in that example, for example, I would say to the person, if dad left you $2 million worth of XYZ stock and you don't want to sell it, if he instead left you $2 million in cash, would the plan be the next morning to go out and buy $2 million worth of XYZ stock? And they're going to look at you and say, "Of course not." And then they realize that they're making an irrational decision that's not in their interest.
Got it. So
So you make them answer the question, right, in a different way so that they see through the emotional part of it to the rational side.
I get it. Well, I hate to cut you short, but I have a date with someone who's on the other end of this phone, and we're going to be late if we don't get moving soon.
All right, honey. Thanks for the call.
Glad you had a great conversation with Josh, and let's talk to some more third generation businesses. And if you haven't listened to the Samantha Bird conversation, go back to Crazy Wealthy Podcast and listen to it. It's a great listen.
It is. Okay, hon. Thank you.
Have a great week. Bye.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Crazy Wealthy Podcast. For more insights, resources, and to sign up for our newsletter, visit crazywealthypodcast.com. Until then, stay crazy wealthy.
The previous podcast by Fusion Family Wealth, LLC, Fusion, was intended for general information purposes only. No portion of the podcast serves as the receipt of or as a substitute for personalized investment advice from Fusion or any other investment professional of your choosing. Different types of investments involve varying degrees of risk, and it should not be assumed that future performance of any specific investment or investment strategy, or any non-investment related or planning services, discussion, or content will be profitable, be suitable for your portfolio or individual situation. Neither Fusion's investment advisor registration status, nor any amount of prior experience or success should be construed that a certain level of results or satisfaction will be achieved if Fusion is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. Fusion is neither a law firm nor accounting firm, and no portion of its services should be construed as legal or accounting advice. No portion of the video content should be construed by a client or prospective client as a guarantee that he or she will experience a certain level of results if Fusion is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. A copy of Fusion's current written disclosure brochure discussing our advisory services and fees is available upon request or at www.fusionfamilywealth.com.